So it's July the 14th, and this is Extinction Rebellion's meeting with Lord Walney, aka John Woodcock, who has been charged with doing a supposedly independent review of extremism and disruptive organisations, and Exile's been named in that, and we have great concerns about what that means for us as an organisation, where it's leading to. So we're just here waiting at sort of somewhat representative group of us, Exile rebels, to talk with Lord Walney about his review and about why we're concerned about it and why we are here as Exile rebels. So welcome, John. I just checked with Cassie, should you prefer John, also Lord Walney. Welcome to this meeting. We're really glad you could join us. Thanks for having us. We asked for this meeting, so we sort of had an agenda planned that we've obviously communicated, but just to remind us all, the idea was that we would, well, we're actually going to start with something that we do in XR meetings, which is called our Solemn Intention, where we read out what we're about. So that'll give you a real flavour, I think, of where we're coming from. It'd be great then if you would introduce yourselves and anything you want to say about the meeting. But just could be quite brief then. Then each one of us, we wanted to share why we're rebels, and we've got this quite a broad spectrum of XR rebels here, so it should give you a bit of a flavour of the type of folks that get involved in Extinction Rebellion. We have, I think, 3 questions to ask, because we would have already taken up a bit of time. And then thank you for sending over your questions, which we'll do our best to answer. I'm afraid we only got them. I only saw them about 2 hours ago, and I was in another meeting, so we haven't had a lot of time to prepare. And in some cases, we would go away and ask other people. And in all honesty, unless there's a policy on it, XR as an organisation doesn't have a view on things. So you might be getting a view of people in the room. So we do sometimes. Okay, so if that's okay, we'll maybe just start with Rabbi Newman, who's going to read our solemn intention out to us.
So I'm Geoffrey, as well as being Rabbi Newman. Let us take a moment, this moment, to consider why we are here. Let us remember our love for this beautiful planet that feeds, nourishes, and sustains us. Let's remember our love for the whole of humanity in all corners of the world. Let's recollect our sincere desire to protect all this for ourselves, for all living beings, and for generations to come. As we act today, may we find the courage to bring this sense of peace, love, and appreciation to everyone we encounter, to every word we speak, and to every action we make. We are here for all of us. So may it be.
Thank you. Cassie, would you like to introduce yourself? Just for a flavour of XR meetings, we often say how we're doing as a way of arriving, but you may not want to do that, but you're welcome. We've already done that. We call it our check-in. But just whatever you'd like to do that would help you to be here and let us know who you are.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Cassandra, but I prefer Cassie, which is the name you can see on screen. I work with John and have done for a number of years now. And I'm having a lovely day. The sun is shining and I did my preparation in the garden.
We use hand signals a lot, and this means we're agreeing or we're happy to hear that type of thing. So we're so used to doing it, we might start doing jazz hands without, we don't mean to be cliquey. Lord Walney, John, do you want to?
Thanks very much, Gail. I'm John. I'm a fairly recent entrant into the House of Lords. Before that, I had a decade as best part of a decade as the Member of Parliament for Bower and Furness in the northwest of England. As you are aware, because you as an organisation and yourself, Gail, as an individual, put in evidence into the inquiry I've been asked to do. I'm looking at a range of issues connected to political activity, the limits of political protest, where the boundaries ought to fall, what can constitute illegitimate disruption and violence, and so obviously what you've had to say is of real interest to me for that. So it's really pleased to be part of this.
Thank you. Welcome again. So we're just going to go round, and each person will maybe take 5 to 7 minutes to say who they are, what they do in XR, and their particular perspective on this issue. So obviously it's going to take a little bit of time, but we wanted you to hear a broad range of folk. So I think Amelia is going to kick us off.
Hiya. Yeah, so I'm Amelia. I'm 23 and I'm part of the XR media messaging team, particularly within the social media part of the team. And I'm not going to speak for too long because there's quite a few of us here and there's lots to say, but I just want to talk very briefly about the impact that this inquiry into extremism will have on young people and on those with mental illnesses within the movement. I think this is a really, really important thing that needs to be addressed. And I feel like it's really important to start off by saying that Extinction Rebellion is not made up of people who are violent or people who are extremists. It's made up of brilliant, kind, caring, passionate, wonderful people. And these people are all terrified and we want to vision and create a better world. And there are thousands of young people in Extinction Rebellion. And these young people, myself included, being only 23, we are part of Extinction Rebellion and we protest because we know that without significant and meaningful action from the government to tackle the climate and ecological emergency, we won't have a future. And by opening up this inquiry into extremism and by naming Extinction Rebellion, what this inquiry is doing is ensuring that thousands of young people across the UK as individuals will be considered extremists. And this will ruin their lives. This really will ruin their lives. We've got young people who are terrified. We've got young people who want to ensure that they have a future and that the people that come after them also have a future. And instead they're risking being considered extremists. And it's also worth considering that the links between mental health and the climate and ecological emergency are really well documented by now. So I don't know if you saw it, but maybe you did, but the statement from the Royal College of Psychiatry. So they declared a climate and ecological emergency and they put out a statement, which I'd be more than happy to link you to if you'd like to see it. I can put that in the chat. And obviously I'm not going to try and summarize it. It's quite a long statement, but they put at the beginning what their key messages within their statement are. And what they say is that climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss have created a health crisis, and it is imperative that psychiatrists are informed about it and actively engage in these issues. They're interconnected factors which individually and collectively have a profoundly destructive impact on human and planetary health, and our actions and their impacts will be inherited by the generations to come. And they have particular implications for mental health and disproportionately affect vulnerable groups, including persons with pre-existing mental illness and children. So in Extinction Rebellion, everyone who's part of Extinction Rebellion is acting at least in part because we all feel the fear and anxiety and hopelessness that accompanies the realization of the severity of the climate and ecological emergency. And we feel this strong desire to make a difference and to try and save the planet. So we're not extremists, we're people who are desperate to save the planet. And we act proportionately with absolute non-violence to do that. So again, by opening up this inquiry and naming Extinction Rebellion, you're broadcasting the message that feeling compelled to act non-violently out of fear and out of love to protect the world is congruent with extremism. And as someone who lives with a severe mental illness, this inquiry will ensure that I am even more discriminated against than I already am. So I have an illness, which means that I am very discriminated against in all areas of life, by healthcare professionals, by employers, and being also labelled an extremist, it has the potential to ruin my life and risk my life even. And this is the same for anyone else in the movement with a mental illness. So the inquiry, it's not just about, seemingly squashing nonviolent protests, but it is actively going to risk the lives of thousands of vulnerable people in the movement. And I think it's really important that we start this off by addressing and considering that. And yeah, I'll pass on to the next person who's going to go.
Thanks, Amelia. Just to say, it takes a lot for some of us to be here. We're not used to speaking in public necessarily, and it doesn't feel easy. Lots of us, even those of us that speak in public, feel some nerves and apprehension being here. Robin, would you like to go next?
John, really appreciate the time, and Cassie as well. I'm just a bod who was just minding their own business and noticing football more than anything else and getting on with a day job, and happened to go to a meeting with a geezer called Sir David King. I think the talk was Small Island, Big Nations or something like that. I can't remember now. And then I freaked out because they talked what would happen to the West Indies with a temperature rise and what that would result in sea rise level, as well as the increase in hurricanes. Obviously, if hurricanes frequencies and intensity changes, it means that it wipes out the islands. It takes a lot longer for the crops to grow back. Eventually, if we do nothing, those islands will be uninhabitable. They'll still be there, but you won't be able to live on them. And on the back of that, I became vegan overnight, and I joined Extinction Rebellion, particularly with samba, with music. That's how I joined. Because though I love my Extinction Rebellion crew, I'll be batshit to go out and get arrested. It's as simple as that. It was the best way that I could show that I didn't agree with what the government was doing with its targets towards the Paris Accord. These islands have been through a tumultuous history, as you all will know about slavery, the yoke of slavery being broken, and then becoming independent nations. And going forward, I'm in Britain, and my parents are from the West Indies. And if I don't speak up about this, those islands will be gone in less than 100 years. And seeing as we're not even on the subject of reparations, those people are going to have to move. And how they're going to move with no money, no backup, having to start their lives again on different countries if this continues. So I joined Extinction Rebellion. And as a person of colour, and I know, you don't want to get nicked. Your life changes within 2 minutes of getting nicked. You can't get decent jobs. Housing can be affected. Me being an activist for XR is dangerous enough as it is. To conflate Extinction Rebellion with an extremist organisation basically puts a mark on my back. That makes me very nervous. The police, whether you believe it or not, will look at a black person being an activist far quicker than they're going to look at a white person being an activist. So they often can try and target you to try and get arrest. It makes me very, very nervous. It makes me even more nervous that we're now going to be put in the same line as extremists. That's putting a target on my back. I get it. I had a whole thing planned, but it's not kind of coming out right. But the score is, you have to have some discomfort with protest if you want social change. No social change has ever happened without protest. And Extinction Rebellion is better than most because they believe in non-violence. To cart us in the likes of, like, I can't even name the groups that you would have on an extremist group. I don't know these things, man. I stick with my samba, I get on with my job, and that's how I protest for the West Indies. But putting a target on our back, that is not cool. It's not cool when we really need to be dealing with the climate crisis. If we save the West Indies and certain parts of the African continent, we save ourselves as people in Britain. What everyone in this country calls a nice nice, hot, sunny day, if it goes up by a couple of degrees, is life-threatening, as we've seen in Canada recently with people dropping down dead because it's so hot, the body can't regulate how much water it's intaking to how much it can sweat out and regulate our temperature. So I'm more than upset we've been put in that group. I'm really upset because it will deter more people that look like me from trying to save the countries that are right now suffering because of the climate crisis. I'm getting nervous and I'm going to stop now. I've said my bit. So the biggest thing I want to say, conflating us with extremists puts a target on my back even bigger. And that scares me even more. And it will scare a lot of people off who look like me from coming out and protesting, saving the West Indies, let alone the African continent. That's it. I'm done.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And if anybody who's spoken realises that there was something they really wanted to say, that nerves got in the way, please feel free to stick your hand up and come back. But I think the message came over loud and clear, just to say, so thank you. Charlie.
Thanks, Robin. I'm quite moved. I'm so sorry to hear of the anguish you're being placed under. Thank you, John, for this opportunity to come and speak to you today. So I'm Dr. Charlie Gardner, and until this month, I was a senior lecturer in conservation science at the University of Kent, specifically at the Durrell Institute of Conservation and Ecology. And ever since I was a young child, I've only ever really had one interest, and that was to work to stop the destruction of the natural world. And I thought the best way to do that was through knowledge. So I became a scientist, and I worked really hard to understand the depth of our crises and develop solutions to them. I did 3 degrees, and I've published over 70 papers on climate change and the destruction of nature in peer-reviewed academic journals. But while science is important, research alone just isn't enough to see us out of this emergency, for the simple reason that governmental leaders have not been acting on the science. Climate scientists have been warning of the need for immediate action for 4 decades now, but global emissions have continued to rise unchecked. We've emitted more greenhouse gases in the last 30 years in full awareness of the problem than we ever did in ignorance. Clearly, knowledge alone isn't going to save us. The UK Parliament has declared a climate emergency. And an emergency is an urgent situation that requires us to stop what we're doing and focus on the task at hand. And that's why I've increasingly been putting aside my career as a researcher and a teacher in order to focus on bringing about urgent change in more effective ways, such as through non-violent civil disobedience. So I joined XR in April 2019, and I was a founder member of the group Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, which is a diverse and transdisciplinary group of scientists who work to ensure that the broader Extinction Rebellion movement remains rooted in the latest available scientific evidence. As some of the people with the deepest understandings of the crises we face, many scientists feel that we have a moral obligation to speak out and take whatever actions we can to bring about these changes we so desperately need. And since we're not being listened to as scientists, our only remaining option is to take to the streets in non-violent action. I feel I've done everything I can in my personal life and in my professional life to bring about the changes we need. And I've spent 25 years doing it, but none of it has been enough. None of it has had hardly any impact at all. We're talking now about nothing less than the survival of life on Earth. And the next few years are going to be the most important period there has ever been or ever will be in all of human history. Whenever I travel to London, I'm urged to be alert to danger and to report anything I see to the authorities. See it, say it, sorted, says the lady on the tannoy incessantly. Well, as a scientist, I feel exactly the same way. I see danger and I have to speak up and act on it. And that's why I joined Extinction Rebellion. I don't do it for fun, but because I believe this is the most important thing that anyone can do. This is the last throw of the dice.
Thank you, Charlie. And I think Jeffrey was going to go next.
So, good afternoon, John, Cassie. This is really difficult. Speaking, reading, listening. How am I going to find the right balance? My name's Jeffrey Newman. I am Rabbi Emeritus of Finchley Reformed Synagogue. I'm a member of XR Jews, of the XR Faith grouping, and of XR Barnet as well. I've been arrested. I was arrested in November 2019. In December 2018, the year before, which is significant, I went to COP24 at Katowice in Poland. And I went because it was 25 kilometers from Auschwitz. And I took a group of interfaith friends. They became friends to Auschwitz. And we felt and we remembered what that place signified. I'm not making a direct comparison between the deliberate extermination of Roma, of homosexuals, and of 6 million Jews. But I want to draw attention to the role of the bystander. Even the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which avoids, wherever possible, any criticism of the government, has warned the government in March about the provisions of the bill that you're investigating at the moment, which adversely affect the Roma community. It's a very limited warning, but it's nevertheless highly significant because the board doesn't do such things. In Germany and Poland, many people knew what was going on, but did nothing. They were bystanders. We, all of us, but you, Cassie, the government, know what is going on. We know what we human beings are bringing about now in this time of global pandemic, of heat waves, of floods and droughts for the global south and for future generations. I think of my own grandchildren and their children and the world that we are leaving to them. We are duty bound as human beings to tell the truth and to act. We cannot be bystanders. In Germany, some were perpetrators, some amazing people with great courage put their lives at risk by saving those who were on the way to the concentration camps, hidden children. My closest friend and his wife were both hidden children in the Netherlands because Dutch Catholic and a German Protestant who were married farmers looked after them and looked after, in fact, their parents as well. But most of us are not prepared to guard and risk ourselves in that way. We're prepared just to be bystanders, to let the world go on and let someone else solve the problem. And I put down in my notes, and I won't say it too aggressively, but I do wonder which you are, Lord Walney. Are you prepared? I wonder. It's a sort of rhetorical question.
I had, Rabbi, and fellow members of the meeting, I had resolved to listen in silence to you. I take what you say in a different context than I would from others, given that you are a rabbi. But I do remember everything that I've been told by my Jewish friends, by my friends at the CST, always to avoid comparisons with the Holocaust. Now, you have just made an extended comparison with the Holocaust and then suggested that I am close potentially to being one of the enablers of that. And I do take that quite seriously. So I
Yes.
hear what you said. Perhaps let's move on now.
I apologize. I didn't say necessarily that you were a perpetrator. My area of concern is those who are bystanders.
You just said enabler. Let's move on, shall we?
It seems to me that with the police, crime sentencing, criminal justice bill, the British government has learnt nothing from the Nazi period in the erosion there of the democratic rule of law, which enabled the takeover by Hitler. I cannot sufficiently strongly express the need for liberty of expression and association. I am terrified by the erosion of such values in the UK. I'm saddened that many Jews now here in this country are claiming citizenship of other countries where their parents or grandparents lived, even of Poland or Germany, because they see what is happening here and feel the need to be able, if necessary, to leave.
Newman, I was serious about wanting to move on from comparisons to the Holocaust, and I think probably it is in the best interest that we do that. I've listened respectfully to all the contributions so far, including very challenging things being said to me by previous members. I've tried to ask you respectfully, can we close this part of it and move on, because I'm deeply uncomfortable with the line that you're going down.
I'm finishing by saying XR is entirely committed to non-violence. It is incompatible with democracy to criminalize non-violent protest, whether by Black Lives Matter, in cases such as Sarah Everard protest, or here in the continuing exposure by Extinction Rebellion of the necessity to act in the face of overwhelming threat to our world in relationship to our climate. We are in no way extreme, but we express our democratic rights as enshrined in the social contract between government and people, and imperiling these rights threatens us all. Thank you, and I'm sorry that you were upset.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for the reflections there, John. They are tricky territories to move into. Paul, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hello, John and Cassie. My name's Paul Stevens. I'm a retired detective sergeant from the Metropolitan Police. In most of my working career, I was dealing with risks to life, and I have been worried. Before I joined XR, I was worried for quite some time about humanity and the fact that we cannot just simply consume the resources of the planet when the planet is finite, and consumerism is all about GDP and increasing growth and increasing consumption. It's quite clear, I think, to anybody that that is unsustainable. But I really just put it down to the fact that as a species, we were greedy and we were going to burn out. So when, I didn't know, but I was pretty cynical, being an ex-copper. And then one day I walked through Oxford Circus, there was a big pink boat, I talked to people, I heard some speeches, and I actually thought there is some hope here. People other than myself and a few friends think the same thing, and they believe that we can do something about it. And then I started reading the science, more on the climate, and understanding that it was a lot more serious than I had thought. The time scale was a lot closer. And really, we're facing a perfect storm. You know, the climate emergency is very difficult. It's very difficult to understand the seriousness and to comprehend the seriousness of the climate emergency. It is difficult. And the more you read about it, you realize there's interconnected aspects that, you know, and I'm not going to go into them, obviously. That was the science side of things. But it is really difficult to comprehend and really difficult to deal with, but huge. It is absolutely huge and absolutely imperative that we take action now. And coupled with that, we have a government, and I apologize if this offends you, but we have a government which is probably the most incompetent, inadequate, untrustworthy government that I have ever experienced in my lifetime.
Well, it's not my government. I mean, you know, there's sort of a different order of things to the previous.
Yeah, but I mean, and I think there are a lot of people to the right of the House that would agree with that as well. But you know, the combination of those two things, the severe threat and the inability to deal with it through government, means that we need to protest. We need to send messages to the government, and we need to be free to do that. Someone once said, and don't ask me who it was, that government, you know, relies on democratic process to get elected. Democratic process relies on the will of the people. The will of the people is shaped and formed by media. And when the government are working with the media, then it becomes a dictatorship. It becomes unaccountable. Now, this is really dangerous territory, and I think we are going that way, which is one of the reasons why the press action was initiated, for example. So if you look at the evidence for that, you've got Daniel Morgan, where the press have worked with the police to suppress evidence, and that's gone on for decades to protect institutions and their reputation. You've got the blockade of the print works, and I'm not going to ask for your opinion on that, but it was only one day's press that was lost. You know, in the big scheme of things, that's not great. But the Home Office and the Home Secretary personally intervened in that overnight, before midnight, with the Assistant Chief Constable, before the Assistant Chief Constable, Charlie Hall, had a chance to talk to his own people on the ground at the protest. Now, this is unlawful. This is interfering with operational policing decisions. And it's gone to the High Court, so we're awaiting that decision. And then we've got Free the Press, which happened 3 weeks ago, and which resulted in the police raiding the art factory for XR and arresting 4 people who were busily painting banners, Free the Press. And they arrested them because there were pink wheelbarrows on the premises. They then went on with 42 officers, smashed the door in and raided a charity because there was a bamboo structure on the roof, and they arrested the 3 charity workers who were not XR on the premises because there was a bamboo structure on the roof. A bamboo structure that took 6 weeks to construct and would take probably a week to deconstruct and take away. So it wasn't of any useful purpose. This is Orwellian, you know what, and I'm pretty sure it will be found to be unlawful. There will be civil actions coming from it. And when you compare that and contrast that with the thousands of professional people I have seen being arrested for sitting in the road with a blue light policy, which allows emergency vehicles to come through, sitting in the road because they're trying to stop life being made extinct on this planet. I mean, there is no comparison. And you're trying to make those people that sit in the street extremists, and those people that are behaving in a way, and I must say the government and the police are behaving in a defensive way, which is protecting financial interests and corporate interests and political interests, and not protecting human rights and the interests of the people. And their duty to protect people and keep them safe is a secondary one, and I'm really concerned about that. I've seen from your profile that you used to be the young person, the shadow minister for young people. I also was children's safety lead for Camden and Islington towards the end of my career, and I worked with a lot of XR youth, and there's a lot of frustration there. There's a lot of anger there as well, because they see the inaction. They've read the science. They see the inaction by the government on the climate issues, and they need a valve. They need to feel that they can express their anxiety and that it may be heard, and it may have an effect, and it may help to ensure that their futures are better protected at the moment. And the PCSE bill, if the way I've read it and the way it's interpreted, goes against the Human Rights Act for a start, but it will enable a police officer to tell them to go away in a corner where they can't be heard, but they have a minimal effect. And that's basically a gagging order. When they're in XR, they're surrounded by non-violent people absolutely committed to non-violence. I haven't seen one example of violence in over 3,000 arrests. And so they're in the best place to be, and it shows them how to do things and how to have a sense of agency without becoming violent. And that's extremely important. If you effectively gag them with the PCSC bill, then I cannot guarantee that. That is the most radicalizing thing you can do.
Thank you, Paul. Are you done, love?
Yeah.
Cassie and John, thanks again for being willing to listen to so much opinion and sharing here. There's 3 more of us to go, and I'm up next. I often start by telling people my dad was a coal miner. I was a working class woman, trained as a scientist. I have 2 kids. And I'm smart, frankly. I've got a lot of things that I think about and care about really deeply. And twice I've taken a hammer to windows, and it feels like a really ridiculous thing for an intelligent woman to be doing, right? And of everything that I've read, history books about how social change works, and the science, my understanding is it's an appropriate and reasonable and smart thing to do. And it might see me in jail, of course. When we consider breaking windows, we have a specific team in Extinction Rebellion called the Embedding Nonviolence Team, who are largely comprised of Buddhists. There's actually a film about some of them. One of them was recently given an honourable discharge for her actions on the streets. And we check in with them about what it means to be non-violent and still to break a window. And what it's about is obviously making sure there's nobody going to get harmed at the time, and about accountability, about being willing to stay there and face any consequences that might happen. And there are defences in the law. So we are very clear often to say that we're not breaking the law, because the laws, we're here to uphold life, and that's the ultimate purpose of the law. And there are defences and juries that have acquitted people. So there's an interesting conversation about the law. And as a result of the impact that we've had on the conversation, it's not just us, it's other people, obviously, like Fridays for the Future and the work of Sir David Attenborough and so on in raising the alarm. But XR have been given awards, global awards for, we were seen as the biggest, having the biggest impact on the global climate crisis in the world. And myself, I've been honoured in several spaces, often with the feeling that I'm the sort of smelly relative that you felt like you had to invite, but people knowing that something significant needs to shift. So one of the things that I've wanted to help us move towards is this conversation about the political economy. And I think it's really important. What I really want to say is that I want a grown-up conversation about it. I just don't believe in this polarity anymore about when people say, oh, it's capitalism, it's socialism. I just don't see it like that. I think there's a really smart way to look at economics and some really interesting suggestions like Mariana Mazzucato talking about mission-based economic systems and so on. And it's no longer seen in any way as being an extreme view to question economic growth as a paradigm to just focus on no matter what. The WEF, the World Economic Forum have done it. The Bank of International Settlements have done it. People at the IMF. Prince Charles is saying we need a paradigm shift, right? And so what XR is about is like, how do we create the space for those big conversations? And that's what we see from the history books is you have to do Overton window breaking, let's say, for being a pun, moves at times. And, as you've probably heard from this, and I do appreciate, again, your courage in coming here and listening to us and being recorded as well, that we have strong views about this, that we don't trust the independence and intention of this inquiry, that we think that it's here to silence us, and we'll be seeking reassurances from you shortly on that we see it in a list of things that are happening around suppressions, around judicial reviews, around the bill that's been mentioned, etc. And specifically, it's that conflation of disruption with violence in the same sentence that we really find objectionable. because disruption happens to all people at all times. You know, you go down the street, maybe you're driving somewhere and there's roadworks, or the marathon's running through town. And democracy, frankly, is messy if it's even functional. There is disruption. It's part of the process and part of the protest. And we're concerned that your review, that you've already made your mind up about us. And obviously you'll have a chance to dispute that. But given what we've seen, what you've put on Twitter and so on, we want some reassurance that this is not just a way of trying to silence us. And I think partly what we've been trying to say here is we're the good side of things. You know, what we're looking at, credible commentators say on the trajectory that we're on, the collapse of civilization is widely accepted to be the path that we're on. You can get all the scientists that have said that and the commentators that have said that. And that's when people use words like anarchy, that's when the meltdown happens. We're trying to prevent that, right? So, yeah, that's what I want to say. Thank you. And I'll hand over to David and then Claire, and then we've got 3 questions for you, and then there'll be time to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, hey John, hey Cassie, good to meet you both. I'm David Lautaro Illayux. Well, the reason why in XR where I support Extinction Rebellion is because I'm not British. I come from a community of farmers and indigenous heritage in Colombia, high up in the mountains. And within the story that I've seen and within my lifestyle with my own eyes, I've seen what's happening in society and in general in the world that is leading us to this climate and ecological crisis, starting with the displacement of people living in the land or in the ecosystems towards the cities, and the destruction of those places and those beautiful ecosystems in the name of, you know, development or everything that is happening. So that is why the reason that me myself, I support Extinction and I'm joined, and I believe that I'm a student right now of politics and international relationships, and I believe that we're at that point where we can all work together, we can all join forces. I'm really concerned about soil depletion around food, you know, food supply chain around the world. My family, you know, been farming for generations, and recently we've been having frosts, we've been having loss of crops, we've been having many things that hasn't happened in many times, many years. So the balance of the world is really coming to its end, John, and that's why we feel like we're not in the extremist side of things. I support XR because of the stir demand, mostly about tell the truth. We need to acknowledge the truth. There is this human side of us to cling to denial or to not believe in the reality that is happening. But the grand scale of things and where we're heading is really deeply concerning. And well, XR, we're here. There's lots of people that are open and are ready to work all of us together to solve this crisis. And if this inquiry kind of goes forward and makes us look extremist, that is kind of shutting down those doors and this opening welcome, because we all do this as human beings and as people that are just concerned for our well-being of our families and keep going. So I really don't like to get too much into like cultures or religions or anything, but at the end of the day, I believe like as human beings, we're here to protect life, to protect the planet. The biggest genocide that is about to happen has been happening for the last 500 years, now ending up with the climate and ecological crisis. And if we continue this path of warming 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 3 degrees Celsius warming, we're going to see complete annihilation of the southern part of the hemisphere. So that's billions of people that are going to be gone. So that's the biggest genocide on our lifetime that we haven't known about. And that is specifically concerning to everyone and to people that come from those regions, John. So XR is a way for us to get in and to voice that and to be able to have part in conversation. And that's why people like myself are here. So thank you for making time for this. And I hope we can have a further conversation to see how we can solve this as humans and as everything that we do in our different expertise and skills. So yeah, thank you. I don't know, Claire, what you would like to say.
David, I just thought to add actually that David's part of our International Solidarity Network, and there are groups across the world that are in dialogue with us. If they are deemed to be associated with an organisation that's called Extremists. Their lives are literally in danger. There are over 200 environmental activists that are killed in different parts of the world each year. And that association is highly dangerous to them. So I just wanted you to know that. Claire.
Thanks, Gail.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. I was a bit of a last minute addition to the group, so I'll try and be super fast because we've taken up a lot of time already. But I guess I wanted to sort of further from what Gail said by mentioning a few books that have come out recently that I think are quite interesting, in line with where your thoughts may have been at some point. So one of them is the climate fiction book Ministry for the Future. I haven't finished it yet, but it references the wet bulb effect, which I'm sure you know has recently taken effect in a couple of places on Earth, and which will increase and expand to make places unsurvivable for the human body. It seems quite well researched. The book places the sort of wet bulb taking hold in a big way in a heat wave in India in only 2023, which may be too soon. It might not take that long to happen, but for sure he's looking at kind of reasonable scenarios. And what ensues there is, you know, an abject atrocity. And I think at the same time, what I'm seeing from the sort of further left recently was a book called How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which I saw across the sort of leftist literary kind of review space and journals, people talking about. It was really an academic talking about kind of much more extreme acts of sabotage, if you like, as a more appropriate, that was seemed to be his position, was that would be a more appropriate response to something that had such a high likelihood of such a high death toll. So in effect, accusing people like us of being too soft, not taking strong enough action and not taking a firm enough line. And I fear that in future, we will look, you know, to all intents and purposes, like maybe we didn't try that hard given what was at stake. And I worry about people who may take more extreme actions, who would not commit to non-violence, who would not commit to accountability, for example. And because we do these things with accountability, we also, I think, justifiably see ourselves as part of what is really a sort of noble tradition of part of democracy, of being able to get social change for the benefit of increased human rights and all of the rest of it. So I just wanted to close by saying that I think, you know, we have issues within democratic systems at large in the world, that politicians need to be elected. And there's a question about whether you can get elected or not on the basis of shutting things down, stopping people flying, you know, telling people not to eat meat, whatever you think the policies are that you need. It for sure is difficult to win popular votes on that, particularly when the public have been so blindsided by misinformation and, you know, I believe quite a deep collusion with the media, particularly when you look at the likes of Rupert Murdoch, people with vested interests who are controlling the narrative that people look at and what people get access to in terms of information. So I just wanted to make the point that I think that a movement like ours makes political possibility for politicians who are in quite difficult times, because I think for the politicians, they have a very difficult time to be able to say, you know, that they would address these things in an appropriate manner that would satisfy the, you know, all different aspects of people who are concerned about this, whether people are concerned to, you know, protect the economy, perhaps on a more conservative end of the spectrum, or whether people are very concerned about, you know, justice issues, human rights and the survival of life, or the, you know, the inequality kind of crisis that we've got and stuff like that. So I just want to say that I think we're hoping to make space for political things to become possible that politicians find hard to deal with.
Understood, thank you.
Thanks. So just going to propose 30 seconds of silence, another bit of an XR thing, apology, just to give us bodies time to settle. And thanks again for 50 minutes of listening. It's appreciated. And we had 3 questions that I think we sent you in advance.
Good. But remind me what they are, because you have.
Yeah, sure. No problem. I think Charlie, you were going to ask the first one.
Mine was actually going to be second, but I'll go ahead anyway.
Okay, sorry.
I'd be keen to hear more about your level of understanding of the climate and ecological emergency we face. What you know about the science, but not just the science, but what you understand about the implications of the science for us as British citizens, for us as a nation, and for us as human beings. What do you feel are the prospects for human beings in this crisis?
Thanks. So there was that, and remind me what the other two questions were.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to the points I was making about this concern we have that this is not an independent process, and that it's basically politically motivated to silence us. Yeah.
Thank you. And remind me of the third, or did that?
No, that was Paul. That was Paul.
Yeah, I would just like to know what is your definition of illegal disruption, and does it accept the Ziegler ruling that recently came out of the Supreme Court? Does that change slightly?
Thank you. All valid. The third, I don't specifically have a definition, and part of this large part of this review is trying to understand better the legal parameters and if they are set right, and where the points of tension are, and to advise in the review that I put forward, which is ought to be published either later this year or early next, to give recommendations for the government on that. So it would probably would have been more useful for me to say at the start, as I can understand whether it could be confusing. I am not a member of the government. I have been asked to come in and look at these things, and obviously I have picked up on and I'm following the levels of concern over the policing and crime bill in particular, but other issues. I am not here to justify the bill, and in fact, you may have noticed that it's now gone through its passage in the House of Commons. It will then come to the House of Lords, where I'm now sitting, and I imagine we'll get a much rougher ride. I would anticipate in the Lords. I would imagine it will get through its second reading, but then I think there will be a lot of focus on the individual clauses. It's obviously a very large bill, and there's been a big focus at the moment on the particular issues around protest. I understand that. My attitude towards that bill will be I want to listen, because in all probability that bill is going to come through ahead of my review being finalised, but which I think is okay, given my review is significantly wider than specific police powers in particular areas. But I will be following the debate closely and listening to some of my now colleagues in the Lords who have got much more experience on this, and weighing up the arguments there. So that's that. I realise that's hazy, but that's where I am in terms of not coming down in particular ways on things like definition at the moment. On my level of understanding, I mean, I was thinking this, and I thought, when you asked the question, I was conscious that you live and breathe climate science, and I am conscious that I think I need to understand to a greater degree and with a greater level of granularity the science which is poured over by various expert parts of the House, in addition to listening to governments, the climate change committees. I suppose in going through my time in the House of Commons and now in the Lords, I have been increasingly convinced of the need to act further and faster than we have. I think I supported just before I left the House of Commons the Labour Party's position of declaring a climate emergency. But what comes from that and what follows from that is not clear in my mind, and of course it is not clear in the country's mind or in the legislature's mind and the government's mind. And I suppose I have and as yet needing to be greater level of focus on, precisely where I would fall in the differing scientific takes on the probability of catastrophic change and the timescale for that. And that is measured along with the futility of any country's unilateral action, which I know is something that you grapple with, and I suppose in another context I'm really interested in hearing more of your arguments, but I think we're probably constrained for time in that, and I'm sure you will say, well, that's why we're international movement, and so it's the futility of UK action alone. And secondly, it is what will the voting public bear on this? And this is what I want to ask, understand more in the time that we've got available. One of the things I want to understand more is how you, to what extent you feel it is necessary and it is possible to take the public with you on the reduction in the economy, which I'm pretty clear you all believe is necessary, rather than simply mitigation through technological factors. And I thought I listened carefully to what all contributors said, and thank you for being as honest as you have been. And I recognise that some of the contributions were not easy for you to say. I'll say a bit about the extremism and your concerns over that in a moment, but just as the link into to what the country would bear. And Clare mentioned the difficulty that you found of you see of politicians being able to be elected on a platform of reversing economic growth, from deliberately making the country and its population less wealthy. I'm interested in how you feel you get that across the line. It seems to be citizens' assemblies, and that if you get a representative proportion of the public, and you give them the right information, not the wrong information, then they go, yeah, okay, we are up for this. I have to say, I'm instinctively profoundly skeptical about that. And so, but I'm really interested in if I've mischaracterized your view on that, tell me why, because I'm interested in what that view is. I'm also interested in where that then leads you. If those citizens' assembly don't deliver what you want, and I've got the sense that so far they haven't. You said, well, they're giving us the wrong advice. Are you bound by that? Are future parliaments bound by that? Would you want to scrap parliamentary democracy wholesale? I think these are really important questions when understanding what your strategy for change is.
This time means a direct response, and next time means just some information. I just wondered, John, are you aware that a climate assembly happened already in the UK?
Yeah, I am, and you weren't overly I mean, that's one of my questions, because you seem disappointed with the outcome, and I wondered if you felt if it had just been done properly, it would have come about in the right. It would have come up with the right answers, or whether you thought it did and it was ignored, or.
Well, I think a mixture of things. I mean, it came up with things like saying we should have a frequent flyers tax, and that's been ignored, for example. But I think it's really interesting to watch that process. There's a programme on the BBC of what deliberative democracy looks like. It just does matter what question you ask first, and it's based on the idea that there's lots of carbon budget left, and that you could do remove carbon later. Sir David King, Baroness Bryony Worthington and others are saying there is no carbon budget left. So there are other things we can get into, but I guess our view, and other people may want to chip in, is that this is not really about what people are going to find reasonable, because we don't have a choice, because the economy is going to collapse. I mean, the Deutsche Bank economist was making that point. Like, it's going to, the way they said it is either we tackle the sort of paradigm of economic growth, in which case this civilization's screwed, or we carry on as we are, in which case this civilization's screwed. So what we want is a space for imagination and for humanity to come together with expertise and redesign. And there's lots of, really interesting ideas on the table around alternative forms of economics. But if we just carry on hoping we can get away with it, it's growing. So it's like either a managed transformation or a disastrous apocalyptical transformation.
That's good. Can I just jump in, because that's really important, and I understand the logic of that, but does it not lead you towards saying that you can try a different form of participative democracy, and you find out, but you may find that doesn't work, and you can blame it on our discourse being corrupted by media influences, by fossil fuels, whatever. And you can try and fix that, but you may get so far, you may not. But ultimately, it isn't a question whether if you believe that this action is essential to save humanity, you can't let democracy get in the way of that, can you?
Well, I think many of us don't think we've got a functional democracy, which is why things are in such a mess already, right? And they could give, as you said, there's quite a lot of rationale for that. But again, to quote a really amazing thinker, Dugald Hine, we're in a time where we move in the direction of more democracy or less democracy, right? Less democracy is authoritarianism, and which is why, to go back to my question, we're really concerned about where this review is coming from, and if it is in the direction of less democracy and trying to suppress protests. So maybe just come back on that point.
No, and I will do it. It's really important. I want to spend some time on it. But you see, my concern, this has not been played out, so neither of us can be sort of our kind of hunches or theses can be proved right. But my concern is that you can change the function of the form of democracy, make it more participatory, but ultimately the public are not going to accept, they are not going to be down with the level of economic reduction which you believe is necessary. And therefore you say it's got to happen, and therefore you will sort of end up in an alternative to democracy itself.
Well, I'll let David come in after, but there was no choice when Hitler was on our border, right? You needed strong leadership, and you needed to tell it how it is and tell the truth. And I totally believe if the British public had told exactly what's going on, they can see it with their own eyes now with Canada and the tube was flooding yesterday, I understand, and so on. If they were told the truth, it was about leadership. There was a 2016 report called Thinking the Unthinkable, which is there was something about the times that we're living in that prevents people from really telling the truth and facing up to these, what they call the fat tails of probability. And so it's, what the UK government says is it's a climate leader. And so what we need them to do is show leadership. And what we say is there's like two main things there. One is stop doing really stupid things like subsidizing fossil fuels and funding new fossil fuels and there's a whole list of things like cancelling HS2 or whatever. And then we have to say there's a problem with the system that we've got and work together to create a better system. And that needs all of us across the whole political spectrum. It's not about what some left-leaning people think. And that's why we're very focused on citizens' assemblies. But I saw David and Charlie wanted to come in as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just on your point, John, I think whether it's citizen assembly or whatever type of democracy, the goal is to, as you say, not right now, the current economy does not represent the majority of the people, right? The majority of the economy is based by corporations and the elite, right? So when we talk about like stopping general economic growth, it's more about taxing or catching those super wealth minority that are consuming most of the resources of the rest of the people, you see. So it wouldn't be really saying, oh, the whole British population is going to be less wealthy. It's about making the ones that are extremely wealthy less wealthy, so that
I'm not sure that's, I mean, I get, and I can see that is maybe more sellable, but that isn't true though, is it? I mean, we all have to take a significant cut in across the country for this to be able to be viable.
I think it's about 1970s levels of consumption, Lord Walney. It's not like, it's not like everybody has to go back in the cave and not have a job and all that. But, this is what we need expertise to iron it out. And I think that Climate Assembly is a really good example. It's beautiful to watch how people come to terms with and reckon with these things. Sorry, Charlie, do you want to jump in?
Sorry, Gail, but thanks. So I disagree with this idea that the changes required are unpalatable to the public. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has been an amazing example of what is politically possible when people treat an emergency as an emergency. Had we been sat here 18 months ago, the idea that the entire population of the country would voluntarily not leave their houses for a year would have been 10 times as inconceivable as what we're talking about for climate. The other thing is that until now, the climate crisis has been sold as something that happens to other people or something that will happen in the future. If we just look at the news from this last week alone, we've had temperatures of 50 degrees in Canada. We've had flooding in New York and London. This is just in a week. There's two key things here. One with regards to the heat dome in the USA and Canada. This is happening much, much, much faster than climate scientists predicted it would happen. The people that know most about this are terrified by the pace of the acceleration. The second thing is that this is happening in Canada, the USA, Britain. We've had fires in Australia and California. The clear message here is that nowhere is safe. We might have previously felt that our wealth as industrialized nations could buffer us from this. This is no longer the case. Agricultural production in the UK last year, wheat and potatoes were down 40% because of the wet spring. These are impacts that are going to touch people's real lives. They're going to have real impacts on people, and it's just once these impacts are real and the politically impossible becomes the politically desirable.
I just spotted Robin had the hand up.
Like, remember, I'm no great Shakespeare, John. I'm just saying, like, how I feel. I hear the lyrics that you're saying the British public ain't going to take a lower living standard to what they have now. They will do if their lives depend on it. Because right now in the South world, their lives are depending on us living within the Earth's boundaries. And I think, though it scares me, because I've met some British people and they scare me with what they think, I still think the majority are sensible and they understand the value of life above any material things that we have. Britain has this World War II kind of thing that they feel that they struggled through and got through, and it all took community and coming together. that's the kind of urgency and the kind of attitude we're going to have if we're going to go through. Britain has a strong tradition of protest. It just has to get the social changes we want, whether that's the bus boycotts that led to Race Relation Act, whether it's the Lancashire lot who refused to take cotton from America to show solidarity with my ancestors in America. They know when the chips are down what the right decision is to make. And it's going to cost a little bit. It is, but they'll do the right thing if they're given the right information. And what worries me is that the right information is not being given to them. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Robin. That's really helpful. It's a useful way, I think, perhaps to go on to the disruptive, the civil disobedience that forms a core part of your strategy. And I hear what you say on what you say is conflation between violence and disruption, and I saw it in your submission into the call of evidence. I mean, what I would say is that they are treated separately. I mean, it is an and rather than a slash, but I think it is. I would say legitimate. I'm clear in my mind that I'm looking at a spectrum. And it is, one of the reasons we're talking today is so that I can hear your views as to why you think one is legitimate and the other isn't, and why one forms part of your movement and the other doesn't. But let me ask you on civil disobedience. If broadly, I think you accept. You as part of your strategy is to take the public with you, to give them the information, to make them hear. Tell me about the debate which maybe goes on within the organisation. I'm not about bluntly whether the shutting down London, the disruption, the inconvenience that you cause, actually alienates people. And therefore potentially makes that harder. Is that a live debate? Are there different views? Are you settled in your strategy on that?
And Paul, to take this?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Obviously, as an ex-copper, it went against the grain for people to be wanting to be arrested or wanting to risk arrest by breaking the law. So this was a difficult one for me. And for me, if disruption is caused to the public, the important thing is that whilst disruption is caused, education is happening, there's outreach, people understand why we're doing it. And we also apologise to people for being disrupted. And this happened obviously in April, in October 2019, and which everybody says London was brought to a standstill. That is absolute rubbish. It was parts of Westminster that were brought to a standstill. It's been hugely exaggerated. Thank you very much for that, but we weren't actually that effective. And I would say Canning Town was the big number. We had a vote on that before it happened. The vast majority of XR people were not in favour of it, but the people that did it, one was an 83-year-old great-grandfather, were very adamant that they wanted to do it in order to bring the message across because they cared so much. So they were very very set in their desire to do it and authentic in their belief. However, the majority of people didn't want to do that. Now, after that happened, we kind of moved away. We'd raised the alarm. Most people knew about the climate emergency by that point. So the kind of justification for mass disruption had reduced a little bit. And we focused on government departments and corporations and financial institutions that were really fueling climate breakdown in a big way. So that our target shifted, and public disruption wasn't done for a year, from October 29 all the way around to September as well, which wasn't about public disruption. It was just in Parliament Square and focusing on the sea.
You've moved on from, are you saying that public disruption is no longer part of your strategy? That
wasn't a major part of our, it happened sometimes because obviously we cover the whole of the UK and sometimes it did in areas, but that wasn't the major thing. It was, and that wasn't recognized, even though we told the police every time, especially the Met, that that's what it was about. It wasn't really recognised. and it was still treated as though, oh yeah, you want to go out and disrupt the public, and that's not fair, it's the life of the community. That's not what we were doing. We were disrupting particular targets.
And so my specific question was to what extent you are alive to, clearly you believe that you've made the case for why you believe that level of or what would otherwise veer into criminality is proportionate. You've made that case. To what extent are you alive as to the need to actually have those actions bring the public with you? I mean, do you poll the public as to know what their view is? If you're shown polling that actually shows them that they really don't approve of this, and then do you fear that may actually make your job in bringing the public with you on these measures harder?
I just bring in Ams, and I can say something more about social movement theory as well, unless Ams picks it up.
I'm probably not going to pick it up, Gail, so you'll definitely need to come in after me. But yeah, I was just going to add to what Paul said, and also maybe address something that you just said, John. That I think it's really important that within the movement we have a huge diversity of tactics, and that is played out on every action that we do. And after April, when there was public disruption, we grew as a movement, like hugely. Significant hundreds or even thousands of people joined the movement after April, after there was public disruption. And at this point now, when actions happen that involve public disruption, we're always engaging with the public during that. So there's always this level of having like human to human interactions and engagements with the people on the street, with the public who are disrupted, or the public who are walking by, to talk to them about why we're doing this, why we're here, and to ask them questions about, what do they think of this? And more often than not, when you have people who are very frustrated or angry that we have disrupted their day, and maybe they're sitting in a car, maybe they're walking past or walking through the protest. I've been in many situations where after talking to someone for a couple of minutes, they've gone from being angry to being understanding. They might not be ready to join the movement yet, but they understand what we're doing there, and their anger disappears. And there have been many times when someone has been angry, had a conversation, walked off, and come back half an hour later with vegan cakes or snacks, or comes back with an apology. And almost everyone I've spoken to in the movement have got a story like that. And, we might not do mass scale polls on that level, unless, I'm sure Gail's going to touch on this, I don't want to say anything that's wrong, but the kind of anecdotal experiences that we have from acting on the street and engaging in a very personal level does show that we might not be bringing people we're not bringing everyone that we meet into the movement, but we are bringing people along with us just by these interactions on an action to action basis.
Thanks, Sam. I think it's really important to say that we've done a lot of research, some of us on social change theory, right? We're in Jim Sharp and Paul Engler and Eric Chenoweth's work and so on. And we were particularly inspired by the social movement ACT UP, who tackled the AIDS crisis. And the sort of takeaway lesson really there is that we're not here to be liked, XR. It's not particularly nice to not be liked. I personally prefers to be liked, right? As they say, it's an Overton window point, and there are other people that come in and sound much more reasonable, and people watch David Attenborough's films, what's all this stuff about, and start to realise that XR must have something right, but it's not about them liking us, so it's not a popularity contest. And although if you sort of look at a YouGov poll from the April Rebellion, you can see a spike in people saying that the environment matters. So we're not here trying to bring the public with us on our particular views. We're here to try and open the space so that people like, Bays can have their climate assembly. What we want is for it to be really foregrounded and celebrated, and to have the right kind of targets and so on for the public to be brought along in a different process. We're not expecting to be popular. I would really like to make sure, Lord Walney, John, that you come back on the point. I saw Claire's hand up as well, but on the point around our concerns about what the purpose of this is in terms of XR. Just please cover that one off, and then maybe you can move on to some other questions you have, and Claire could come in.
I'm genuinely trying to be open-minded and understand the theory behind your thinking behind the action that you are taking. I'm trying to test your understanding and increase my understanding of the limits of protest and why you feel it is proportionate to break those limits. I think both Amelia, Robin, and others mentioned the idea that you're worried that I want to label everyone in who supports XR as extremists, and that is certainly not the case. And I don't think I have said anything which would suggest that. But I think it is I think it is legitimate and useful to look at where in a parliamentary democracy where people are able to express their views in the ballot box, what is legitimate in terms of uses of I wouldn't say, I'm not sure I would describe it as force, would I? But certainly physicality to influence decisions. And I think that is problematic. I use that word advisory, it's problematic, and it is worth exploring where the boundaries of it ought to be and what the rationale behind it ought to be.
Do you want to come in? I've got a little bit more to say to Lord Walney. Is yours directly related to that?
Mine was from previous, so I can bring it after. You go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
I'm keen to come back on something else that you said as well, Claire, but we'll do it after.
Okay. I mean, but part of the idea is that societies get stuck, and it's almost like movements like ours are like a bit of an immune system. And when immune systems get flared up, it's quite a sort of an irritation. They don't feel comfortable, but that's how the change happens. There is a paper circulating at the minute, it's not peer reviewed actually, but that says that from ocean scientists saying that there'll be no life in the ocean within 25 years other than bacteria. Like when you read stuff like that, you know, I think the IPCC report that's going to come out this year, with at least the leaks, again, we don't know when it's fully peer reviewed, but they're talking about whether humans will survive or not. There are these kinds of things, John, that when you're looking at that.
I noticed on your legal strategy, sorry, I won't come to Clare after, but I noticed on your legal strategy, you and I didn't make a note of the name of it, but about 20 years ago you looked at the landmark legal case on conjoined twins and that it was deemed to be legal for medical action to have been taken knowingly that it would end the life of one twin to ensure the survival of the other. And so it's on your website as part of the rationale for, you know, that sometimes difficult decisions are needed for the greater good. Now, that for me suggests that there is not there would not necessarily be a hard barrier against this level of absolutely non-violent disruption and no further. And I know, and that's when I was going to ask Claire about, because Claire did suggest that there are others who are pushing this potentially to go further here and abroad. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. If we're all going to die, then why would you stop at just blocking the roads?
You could mention our principles and values, Claire.
Yeah, so I don't actually know the document you're referring to, John, that contains a reference to that case. So
let me find it. It is on your website, so let me find it. I can't do it now, but we'll send it.
Because we're a mass volunteer movement and I work with the media team, I can confirm that it's very difficult to keep track of who's doing what with our
I have some experience
communications
of working in
from
political volunteer movements.
and many people with different access to different channels that say all manner of different things. So that's a little bit of a challenge for us. But anyway, excuses aside, within our principles and values, there is a commitment to non-violence, and this is something that's come up recently around some of the groups that, for example, protest on different, more, I would say, much further to the left than us, perhaps, if that's your sort of like classical way of describing it. And those arguments do come up in activist spaces about non-violence and about commitment to that, and about privilege, and about what side of that argument you're on. And we have to work very hard actually with our elders and with our particularly the embedding non-violence team to continue to assert that is an absolute guarantee that lies at the heart of the way that we set the movement up, and that we won't be, pushed away from that. And if people choose to undertake other forms of activism, then we won't criticize them necessarily for that either, but we certainly won't take part ourselves. Do you know what I mean? We just say it's up to other people what they do, but if they join us under our banner, that is a very firm commitment. And we've had to fight really hard actually with people who've questioned it and not sure, and we work really, really hard to hold that. So I think it's really important for you to know that. What I was trying to bring in my piece earlier was really that certainly in academic spaces and people who are looking at movement kind of theory and, how to make rapid change happen in the face of a life or death scenario, that I can understand people are exploring different ideas, which I personally find deeply uncomfortable. And I think I could say that, these questions are alive on the broader left. Yeah. and I don't ever want to be part of unaccountable or violent action myself. And I think a lot of people in XR agree with that, but it doesn't mean that discourse isn't happening out there in other spaces and perhaps around Europe or in America or anywhere else,
Just before Gail and Amelia comes in, just on that's really helpful. I was contacted by and someone who's made a formal submission into my call for evidence, but has requested to do so anonymously, but who is a quite recent former senior member of your teams. You wouldn't say governance teams, but your leadership circles, who is concerned about the way in which middle ground opinion on a broader set of issues, social issues beyond climate, there feels like a level of intolerance within Extinction Rebellion for that. And I raised it because I noticed that you make in your introduction, Gail, and also on your website, it's very prominent that you are beyond politics, that but clearly that there's someone who has stepped back because they don't feel that broad range of views on other issues is welcome. And I wonder if that is do you recognize that as an issue that you're grappling with within the organization?
I think there has been a little bit of concern, I would say, around the window break-in. It's not the majority, and we had two what we would call reflection circles, to sound a bit hippie-ish, to discuss and take feedback on that. And as I said, there'd been a prior piece with our embedded non-violence team. I think the other place where you get separation and difficulties in a movement like ours is around issues of power and privilege, and especially after the tragic murder of George Floyd and the awakening into the climate movement of issues of race and racism and colonialism, that there were some people that felt that wasn't the kind of stuff that we should be talking about. And some people wanted to not have that conversation, and some people felt it was essential, and that's the basis of the sort of climate crisis. And we're trying to hold a broad brush of opinions together. There are people that think it's just about the science and it's just about telling people the science, and we don't need to get into these other wider conversations. I feel very firmly myself that we absolutely do, that you know, we're in a time of multiple crises. I mean, I guess that speaks back to that concern shared earlier. You know, there was a sort of report saying there was no racism in the UK, and we've seen what's just happened to these three footballers in the last couple of days. You know, I mean, that's how non-racist the UK is. We've got some serious issues, folks, and we just want to look at that, because the reason why we're in this crisis is because other countries have been deeply exploited, and their natural environments have been trashed, and we've been told we don't have to think about it or worry about it. So that's an alive conversation across the movement. And obviously then you've got the sort of wider concerns about cancel culture and culture wars and all that. It's all here and live, John. And
are
again,
you specifically, can I ask,
yeah.
Are you specifically concerned about the other former member of the Labour Party and SWP, Socialist Workers' Party entryism, has been a live debate within the Labour movement for a long time? Is that an area that you're concerned about within Extinction Rebellion, or is it a live discussion?
I think they name us as one of their campaigns, and we find that a bit cheeky, because we're not, you know, we're not one of their campaigns. And like, I don't really know them. I mean, I may have more to say, but I don't believe there's anything worrisome about SWP, apart from my experience has not been positive with them. But I don't think they've got like violent intentions.
They're not violent, but they are anti-democratic. I mean, they don't believe in democracy.
Okay, well, see, I didn't know that, but yeah, I mean, people, when movements are successful, I think my understanding is like SWP have a strategy of entering into movements, and we had a policy against co-option. We specifically said that we didn't want to be co-opted by other movements. I mean, we're obviously more left-leaning in terms of our makeup. We have had Boris Johnson's dad on stage with us. We have been funded by a former member of the Bullingdon Club. You know, I mean, there was a guy came around talking about setting up XR Conservatives, and there's just been a brilliant article in the Telegraph. I've forgotten his name. Somebody might remind me. By
Tim
a guy.
Stanley's piece. Was it Timothy Stanley?
Yes, exactly. I retweeted that, you know, saying there was nothing more conservative than an old lady in front of a bulldozer, right? Boris Johnson talked about lying in front of a bulldozer. He never did. We'd like him to. This has to be all about all of us, and we're all in different stages of our thinking. At this time, some of us understand that there's a new consciousness arising, which now sounds very hippie, but I understand politicians look at this teal consciousness, which you look at the values, conservative values as well, that are in this country, and family values and the values of personal responsibility. And many of us subscribe to those values, as well as values of pluralism and environmentalism and so on. There are lots of different aspects to our body. I'm very tribal when I'm watching Forest Green Rovers, for example. I'll just hand over to Rabbi Newman.
Thanks. I'm hearing two slightly different things going on, and I might not be right. One is the investigation into legal frameworks, democracy, and so on, which is and in which you're trying to get a sense of what XR is, how it works, who it is, and you're getting a bit by a sort of a group of people. Most of us, or many of us, don't know each other, may not have been in a room together before. So that's one element. But the second, for me, that you asked, which is really important, is in your thinking about how does change happen, do you want to bring the public with you? And how do you move that? And my own sense, I go back to what Charlie said, my own sense is we are in a completely different place now than we were a year or 18 months ago. And I think Extinction Rebellion is going to need to do a great deal of and is doing it, but it's got to go a lot further, rethinking, reworking post-COVID, because the world has changed. We now have seen a manifestation of global climate change. It's not something completely different. It is not even a harbinger. I was using that word earlier, but then I realized it's not a harbinger. It's what it is in one particular way. It's a global pandemic. climate change is going to hit us in many, many different ways. But now, the way that communities have begun to come together is meaning, I think, that we have to look at how do one help with resilience within communities. And I think that Extinction Rebellion will reshape and reform itself, or something else will crop up, which is, since the pandemic is never going to go away, but is living in a new world. And that's what I'm aware of or thinking about at the moment, and just hearing a little bit of it here and now.
Claire, and then John, maybe if you let us know if there's anything else you want to know.
I thought that was really interesting from Rabbi Newman at the end, and it suggests to me a rather different role for Extinction Rebellion, which is actually less of a sort of, disrupt to shake the tree, and more of a sort of building resilience and capacity. And I wonder if I've sort of characterized that rightly, and if you see a tension between, if you go down that route, then the shake the tree disruptive elements of smashing windows, blocking roads, is going to be in tension with that.
I don't know if anyone else wants to come in specifically on that. I mean, I think what we're quite well aware of is that, yes, we need to take as many people sort of with us as possible, but equally, if we're advocating for a form of representation of ordinary citizens in deciding their sort of fate, if you like, in sort of how to respond to this enormous challenge, then it's not for us to be seen to take any power or tell people how things should be done, and indeed to try and get like the most wisdom in the space, to try and get the most expertise to the surface, to try and get that process well enough documented so that the majority of the public can see straight into it with transparency, to increase the public level of understanding as much as possible, which I think was something of a failing of the French CA that tried to be open, but perhaps could have been better in terms of raising the bar on public education for the issues. It's very important that people believe and understand the risks that we're facing. And hearing you say, John, that you need to look more depth at some of the aspects of it, I would say, I heard you sort of mention something that sounded a little bit like you might think there's a sort of get out of jail techno fix type of route, which is an offer, and maybe there's other offers which we're talking about that feel a bit more difficult to do with looking at economic models and how we run the economy and such like. I would really ask you to look into that technology stuff in great depth. It's highly dangerous that we've written policy based on things that don't exist. That's for me, there's a big risk question here, and I think that's what we want to sort of get people to understand. And I think people can find the positivity in sort of how to make a collective response in the weaving together of people. We part of our job is to stay with the risk and getting people to understand, even if it's people think it sounds like a low risk, when you say a small percentage number, but if that risk is an all system collapse, the smallness of the percentage figure is less and less significant, right? Because it's an all system collapse. And so really that's been part of our job, is try and get people to understand the risk we're in, and the risk factor kind of in terms of the analysis does change quite quickly year on year because climate science is moving very, very fast. So it's important to me to know that people such as yourself and other people in Parliament would be really getting to grips with climate science, really to understand the depth of it, because the people I've met from the House of Commons before don't have any obligation to learn it well, as far as I'm aware, and some of them really don't understand it very well at all. And so that's,
It's not low risk, by the way. That is the path we're on, is the collapse of civilization path.
I understand that as your firm view.
Well, no, that's the view of Kevin Anderson, Professor Anderson from the Tyndall Centre on Climate Research. I mean, I don't know if Charlie wants to come in, but
I didn't mean to suggest it was your
and the Committee on Climate Change as well. Not that they've said it like that, but in their 2008 report said they said we should be, last year they said we should prepare for 4 degrees of warming. In 2008 they said that's probably beyond adaptation. So it's not, I'm sharing other views, and that's why we've got XR scientists here to hold us back if we're just saying anything a bit out there. But sorry, Lord Walney.
Can I just say nothing that Gail has said is outside of what mainstream, the most respected scientists and institutions are saying. There's nothing particularly controversial about these these predictions of collapse of civilization.
Understood. I just wanted I suppose we've gone around the scale of the system change which you feel is needed, and of course you feel it is much greater than is currently being proposed, and and Claire mentioned the difficult, and I referred to the difficulty of getting elected on or getting buy-in for what seems to be a very radical platform. And I noticed, I read, as you would imagine, I've read Policy Exchange's a piece from a couple of years ago. I don't imagine it's your favorite document, but I noticed the quote from an article by Samuel Hayward in there, who seemed to be trying to answer the critics that Claire mentioned, who are sort of on your more radical end, saying you're too soft, and saying basically, the quote was, first, the current of anti-capitalist practice and principle that runs through the movement, the XR movement, and second, that adopting that strong anti-capitalist stance would be movement suicide. And that's suggesting basically that you are in favour of the removal of the anti-capitalist system, but you and that is a definable far left position, but that you probably understandably feel that will be a barrier to actually, if you say it explicitly, it'll be a barrier to further growth. Is he unfair in what he says in that? He's saying
I to be really honest, I don't know who Sam Hayward is. Somebody colleague might tell me, but I can be really specific on this point, John, because I've been leading a sort of money rebellion approach around XR. I always talk about the political economy. I don't talk about capitalism, because I don't know what people mean when they're talking about capitalism. I've been in the tax justice movement for many years now. Lots of people think we don't have a functional form of capitalism. So, for example, it's deemed to be okay. We don't have an antitrust policy anymore in many places, right? So, and to me, that's like a key component of capitalism is competition. And yet there's been a sort of whole thing about setting up governments in competition with each other. There's lots and lots of debate, right? And what we're about is not going into this polarity. Like if you use like a label like anti-capitalist, first of all, it just signals something to people that's sort of saying, A, it sounds like I'm stupid. B, I want some kind of weird version of communism or whatever. And C, I hate business. And D, I'm against the market, whatever. There are interpretations of that. And as I said to you earlier, there's loads of brilliant economists out there looking at alternative systems like donut economics. You've got regenerative economics from John Fullerton. And the World Economic Forum, by the way, just said this year, this form of capitalism's over and they want a different form. And all we're saying is
growth rather than anti-capitalism. Is that fair? That's true, but is that fair?
It's not even anti-growth, right? I mean, it depends how you measure GDP. The guy who invented GDP said, don't use this as a big measure because it's a problem. And at 20, you can hear my voice, right? I can give you an hour's lecture on all of this stuff. It's intelligent, right? It's a grown-up conversation about what we want our economy to be for. If it's just for growth for the sake of it, and it's lining the pockets of very few people, and you're getting vast inequalities and all that comes with that, it's a problem. It's a problem on so many fronts. Do you feel
that grown-up conversation, your ability to have that grown-up conversation may be inhibited by, I know I picked this as a humorous example, but gluing people's bottoms to the pane of glass in the House of Commons. Is that a tension that you feel? Because clearly you are.
To be honest, it's what gets you invited into places. I've been on the Wilberforce Society, the Oxford Debating Society, the BBC, Today programme, and so on. That's part of the thing, is to be able to go on and say, and say stuff, but actually it's not really, the conversation's not about what XR people think, it's about making the space for that conversation to happen in the world, right? And it really does need the best of all our brains and imagination. It just is not about, well, from my point of view, and the way that I try to build XR with writing those principles and values, it's not about polarities and saying, I'm in this camp, you're in that camp. We're in a crisis and we have to come together right now and use the best of everything that we know. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Sorry, Paul, go on.
Paul?
Sorry, I was just coming back on the I think it was the Extremism Rebellion report. Is that what you were talking about from Policy Exchange? Yeah. So that was written by Richard Horton, who you know was kicked out of the police for his role in the Stephen Lawrence investigation and the way he used spy cops in that investigation. And I would like to ask you, seeing that you're educating yourself with Policy Exchange, do you know who funded that report?
No.
No, that's quite an important issue, isn't it? Because if it is backed by fossil fuels, then it is very important that that's leading the way for a person like.
Oh yes, I saw you. I did see you made that. That you made that claim. Yeah, no, noted. Look, I did have one final question that I meant to ask earlier, if you don't mind. Just what your message is on the strategy of using the criminal justice system as what part of the strategy of making the case for action in the ways that you do. What's your message to people who are already suffering from the strain of that criminal justice system and can't get access to justice? Is it a problem for you that actually you are adding to that strain, or do you just think it's inevitable?
I mean, again, it's a really brilliant and interesting question, right? Because I have friends quite high up in the legal system who tell me what's going off, right? It's in a meltdown because it's been underfunded and the legal aid system's been taken to pieces and so on, like the health service. And we knew with the COVID crisis, according to the sort of Cabinet Office Risk Register, it was the biggest risk out there, the COVID crisis, and yet we weren't prepared for it. So what our concern is that in these sort of like end times of extraction and breakdown of civilization, is that the money's being sucked out of public services, and it's not. And what you need are people like us who are sounding the alarm. You know, we're not the problem. The problem is the underfunding of services. And part of the, I suppose, I'm not sure I'd call it legal strategy, but really we are standing on the shoulders of traditions of people who say, look, I'm going to do this thing because I have to speak up now. My conscience dictates it. The brilliant barrister Polly Higgins brought up this idea of a conscientious protector. I dispute what Paul said. I don't think we do break the law, actually. We're here as lawmakers, you know, and what speaks to people can speak to people as always, is that level of willing around being sacrifice. You know, it's not just about disruption. It's that, you watch a beautiful aging rabbi being carted off, a 93-year-old guy, grandparents, mothers, breastfeeding mums, desperate and willing to have their voices heard in this way. That's where this comes from. And the guy who glued his arse to an aeroplane's in court soon. He's the brilliant James Brown. He's a former British Paralympian cyclist. We seem to have attracted a few Olympians to our ranks. People who are courageous are doing these actions, John. Not people who are, trying to disrupt other people's lives for a laugh. You know.
Understood. And I guess it's an important note to finish on. Look, I really appreciate the time that you've given. You've been really. Oh, sorry, Robin. You wanted to come in.
Yeah, sorry, bruv, but John, sorry. I'm just making sure everyone realizes these conversations has the privilege of time, and in the South world, people are dying right now. Mm-hmm. The sea rise level, there's already famines going on. You know, like we've got a massive amount of privilege to not only protest and not end up being dead, where an awful lot of people in the South world are getting killed for protecting their environment, And I just want that mentioned at the bottom line. We don't have time, and anyone who says we've got the time has got shed loads of privilege. And I just want that mentioned on tape.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
We would normally finish with a round of like checkouts, and it probably take too long, but maybe if 3 people might want to share a note of gratitude for this time that we've had together. Who's feeling to? I mean, I could say I genuinely feel listened to, Lord Walney. I genuinely feel like there's more space here than I'd anticipated, and I'm feeling grateful for that. Who would like to go next? David.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, John and Cassie, for accepting the invitation from Political Circle into having this meeting. And yeah, just really grateful for the conversation and us here trying to figure out how to give importance and value to something that is not like nature and just wealth in general, health in general, which is not really valued in the modern kind of world. So let us figure this last trick situation out. So yeah, thank you for your time, John, and hopefully we can keep working together as in political work and sense. I don't know who wants to say anything else.
I should definitely say something, but I don't know if I would be the third or if another third person wants to say. But well, thank you all. You've genuinely it's been a really engaging conversation, and I think you've been quite open and frank, and I get the sense honest with me, and you haven't shied away from the tensions within your movement. And I didn't know what to expect when I came on. I didn't, David, you did give me the cast list. Until I saw the cast list, I thought, is this going to be 50 people on the Zoom who are just going to take their turns at shouting at me and making things deeply personal? And you haven't done that at all. You've been really welcoming spirit, and it's been the most, let's say, it's been the most mindful hour and 3/4 with the way in which you conduct meetings that I've had for a long time. So I'm grateful to that. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye,
See you
everybody.
later, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Love and resistance.
Bye-bye.